Facebook, good to have you as always. Thankful for you being part of this. We're going to get started. What are the counterfeits of recovery?
We are going to cover both sides of that question right after I read this review here on iTunes. Thank you for taking the time to do that. This one is called Hope. I stumbled upon a recommendation in group I belong to on Facebook for the Betrayed and listened to one episode and I was hooked. About a week after listening to several of your episodes, I introduced you guys to my husband and we recently just got your program Shattered to Thriving. You guys have given us so much hope and helped us so much. My marriage is a work in progress, but we would be lost without the three of you. You are amazing and thank you so much for what you do. Again, I'm going to say thank you, but also we're facilitators. We're giving you these tools and you're taking it and you're the one doing the work. So, yes, we're all a work in progress, but you guys are the ones doing the work. So good job.
Yeah,
And
nice work.
yes. Okay. So let's get going.
This is an exciting topic for us, B.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a tricky one, to be honest with you, and maybe I'll give a little background as to how it's come up. You know, Ashlynn, Coby, and I, we work in this field and coaching people, doing therapy, running groups. We interact with so many people who are in different stages of the process of healing, and we also experience their energy and where they're at in their life and the outcomes that they're getting. We see those things, and it kind of lends to this question of, you know, when I think of somebody in recovery, you know, what does that mean? What is real actual recovery? And I'm not talking about what does it look like. I'm talking about what does it feel like,
which is that tricky thing that you're like, but what does Brannon mean when he says that?
So what you guys know some people in recovery.
Uh-huh.
What do, like, okay, Ashlynn, for you first, from the betrayed side of things, what is a woman in recovery? What is her energy like? How does she kind of approach the world, and what is her life like?
One, I have to say, I love seeing the shift happen,
Mm-hmm.
where they go from, often for me and for so many, it's lots of finger pointing, and my life is this way because of all these other factors, right? And not a whole lot of self-reflection, which I own. And so when I see women who are really living and feeling differently in recovery, they are taking inventory of their own actions each day. They're slow to respond. And so they're not reacting in those, fight or flight or whatever. They're being thoughtful and mindful of how they want to show up in the world. They're taking care of themselves. They start to find their voice. And so that can be fun and a little bit messy, but we go from maybe being a doormat to I'm honoring myself while also loving the people around me. And it can look kind of mean sometimes, but it is a different feel to see a woman start to stand in her truth and to see and use her power.
Okay, so I'm going to regurgitate exactly what you just said, just in different words, just to drive it home. A woman in recovery, a person recovering from betrayal trauma, simply put, they're at peace. They have peace in their life, and they stand in their truth. They're healthily boundaried, and they are accountable, and they are empowered, and there's purpose in their life. And that's what you feel from them. What they're not is stuck. They're not stuck having that relationship dictate whether or not they're going to be happy or not. They're not stuck in a victim stance. They're not stuck in the grieving process. They're not just stuck in the anger. They've worked through a lot of it. There's relief there. That the weight has been lifted of the pain of betrayal, and it's turned into a positive into their in their life as they're going through the process. And it's awesome to feel and see somebody in that place, even though they've been through something very, very hard. So Coby, now I want to throw it past you. A person who's struggling with addiction, they start to get into recovery, this elusive thing, recovery, whatever it is. Who are they? How do they feel? What does that look like?
They have the energy of mindfulness. They have the energy of being aware of their environment, but also of self. They have an energy of curiosity, of steadiness, of resilience, of being unflappable. And they'll still feel pain. They will still feel the sting of life and what they're going through, even if it's with their partner, but that they're undeterred. So I think that there's a very real, there's not a force that's involved in it, but it's a focus that that not a focus that drives them, but they have a focus that allows them to mindfully step through what is hard, despite how it feels. So there's very much a measured increase of resilience to shame that they have, and there's also this really great self-awareness. So that is very Yoda-ish.
They become Yoda.
Seriously.
You have to become Yoda to be in recovery. That's what you guys
Yes.
are
That
saying?
doesn't sound
At a
magical
certain
at
point
all.
in time, your
Yeah.
ears will grow out and green.
You speak weird.
Yes,
Okay,
and then
awesome.
you'll speak in riddles. But the truth is that those, like, I can feel it. Now, that's not to say that someone in recovery isn't going to have a moment where they totally fall apart. I want to be really clear. Being in recovery does not mean that you won't have moments where the wheels come off, where you fall into shame, but it's your ability to, in a more expedited way, get grounded and work through
Bounce
it.
back. Yeah.
Yes, in a much more efficient way without all the collateral damage.
Mhm.
I'm hearing, again, here's my regurgitation for you, Coby: steadiness, confidence, self-reflection, resilience, and ultimately all of those things. When you know yourself and you live that way, you have peace.
Mhm.
And what you aren't is dishonest. You're not a manipulator. You're not trying to be in denial or anything like that. You're just steady and vulnerable and confident. So these things sound wonderful. And one thing you didn't say, Coby, was sober.
Mm.
Interesting, huh?
Because
That
there's
is.
an energy that can come from that has a very unique distinction.
Well, you said something, though. You said that a person in recovery can handle difficult things.
Hmm.
And what that means is that if you're able to tolerate discomfort, then you're able to have some relapse prevention and sobriety, because an addict acts out because they're numbing out the discomfort.
Yeah.
Sobriety is a byproduct of recovery. Sobriety is not recovery itself. And
Wait. Say that again.
yeah, we've talked about this before, but sobriety is a byproduct of real recovery. Long-term sobriety happens to a person who can handle the hard, who can love themselves regardless, who can be resilient, who accepts themselves and accepts others and is connected to themselves and others. Sobriety comes to that man. Sobriety comes. Where it gets backwards, and we've talked about this before, is thinking you need to be sober enough in order to be in recovery. Now, I realize when I say that, some people might be listening saying, well, yeah, sobriety is important. If my partner's acting out, then he's not in recovery. He's not a safe person. Sobriety is important,
Mhm.
but sobriety does not earn your recovery. And that's one thing to understand.
Sobriety also doesn't earn your okayness.
It has nothing to do with your self-worth.
Sobriety does not earn you worthiness.
Yes. Okay.
But let me add one thing on this, because this thought has been persistent. That is, it's super important that everybody remembers this about. Well, this is an example of me personally. when I started recovery with you, Brandon, I was in your foundations class. I had only in 2 times in my life had I gone 6 months with, of being sober. Okay. And then I started specialized recovery. And I remember in month 5, really being really anxious, really frantic, really worried, and just like, oh my gosh, can I actually get to 6 months? Can I actually get there?
Right.
And I actually probably started at like month 4, to be honest with you. And I was just kind of like this, like
Fear. Yeah.
this ball of like active nerves, because I was so freaked out
Well,
about
and
it.
I was too.
And
both of you are like watching this thing. Is it going to
Waiting,
happen or
yeah.
not? Yeah.
When's the
Yes.
next shoe
Think
gonna
of the
drop?
tension there.
Yeah.
Yes.
oh, it was palpable. I mean, I remember just being just a basket case in groups so many times. And then once I got past 6 months, for me, I think that's I think that's when I was able to let go of the majority of using sobriety as a measurement, because I was so focused on these other skills, not just daunting, but the daunting part of it. What was really front and center for me, it really freaked me out. There's no part of that energy that I had in those first 6 months that describes recovery.
It can actually be counterproductive to it is counterproductive to real recovery, which is if real recovery is connecting to yourself and having confidence in yourself, and you're telling yourself a story that if what I always say, if I don't touch my penis enough, then I'm good enough. Then and you try really, 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 really hard not to do that.
Yeah, totally.
Well, you're actually feeding that same narrative that your worth is contingent on something, and that you have to still prove yourself to get there. And so it's feeding that very root, that very core to the addiction, that you are broken, you are not enough. Now I want to bring this back to the betrayed. We're kind of talking about both sides here. You guys, am I going too far to say, and I'm going to say this, that some therapy groups, some 12-step groups, even some therapists, but really some 12-step groups can really support the shame, not recovery, but the shame?
Yes.
Yes.
No, you're not too far.
So let me answer that rather than just in a word. Let me say that every 12-step group that I attended, and they were in various cities, it was I could feel the thick fog of shame
At the 12-step group.
in each of those meetings. Yeah. And there were some that were,
the energy there was just shame.
Yes. And this is a traditional SAA, and this is and then various,
offshoots
and other variations of it, we'll say. Okay. Yeah. So, it's remarkable. Just thinking back to him, it was like, oh, wow.
Well, how do you start a meeting?
Hi, my name is Coby. I'm an addict.
So to me, that's a bit of shame.
Well, but
over and over.
Let me play devil's advocate with this. Isn't that just acceptance?
There has to be a certain level of acceptance, for sure. And then there is a very important line in the sand where you transition from acceptance rather than denial, and then you start going into self-fulfilling prophecy. and
interesting. That's
and I think that's really, really key to understand, because everybody has to understand my life is a wreck. I'm powerless, right? As step 1 talks about, right? I'm powerless without the help of God in my life. And everybody has to have that, but there's an energy that's associated with repeating that sentence over and over and over. And for some people, going daily.
Does it feel like, Coby, that the answer to recovery in these 12-step groups is to emasculate yourself? Is to like show up weak? Is to like now I gotta say, before I say anything more, I got to say, I love the 12 steps. I think they're powerful. I think they're inspired. I think they're awesome. And I think some of the ways that the 12-step groups are run actually support emasculation and support shame and support, showing up weak in your life and not honest. And so, like you say, the collective energy of those groups many times is self-hatred and self-rejection. And a lot of it, some of these, we're here in Utah, it's very conservative, rigid. Some of those groups feel like they're really anti-sex just in general. Just sexuality is
Like,
just
let's just
bad.
shut down all of my sexuality because it's bad and it's brought me so much pain. Let's just shut it down.
Which
Yeah.
you guys,
Yeah.
I know, have seen people have to work through. Okay, I'm going to get myself into sobriety, and now I have to work my way out of the narrative of sex is bad and it's hurt my life. Right.
Yes, exactly.
So
So if I
yeah.
self-reject myself, I tell myself that my sexuality is so wrong and evil, then I'll be good. Then I'll be a good boy, and I won't act out anymore. Then I'll get my 90-day chip. Everybody will say, rah, 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 you're amazing. You made 90 days. And then I'll relapse on day 91. I even know some guys who have gone to 12-step groups for years and years and years, and they have years and years and years of sobriety. But you know what they don't have? They don't have like real passion and intimacy in their relationship.
Yeah.
They don't have healthy polarity between the masculine and the feminine because they are still compliers. They're still very weak in their relationships because they don't know who they are.
They don't have
Yeah.
the energy that we described at the beginning of the episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's not recovery. That's sobriety and like beating yourself up for years and years and years for long enough. That's not real recovery. It's
Right.
not what we're after.
Okay, so I'm going to throw this out and we can then go into the counterfeits of, okay, now what? We've seen a lot of people this year, 2020, who I'm guessing, they've had, like you said, years of recovery. Some of them did, inpatient, or they did a whole program for addiction and betrayal. Okay. They lived it for years, but 2020 brought us into like, where are we really at? Right. What are our truths? What are our values? What's important to us? What's not? And we found, sadly, a lot of people coming to us who said we were in recovery for 7 years and then it's all been a lie. Because to me, I look at it and think a lot of them found this daunting. They found sobriety and they didn't get to do the fun parts that we do in our Shattered to Thriving program, like the 2 last modules of like, okay, now find purpose and find those ways to connect with each other and build something new.
Yeah.
Rather than just like, let's not do the things that we were doing, but there's no rebuild.
Yeah.
And
I love Ashlynn, I love what you're saying about our last 2 modules in Shattered to Thriving. I think you bring up another counterfeit that's so common, which is, a couple will say, or a person will say, I've been working recovery for 5 years. And if you dig into that a little bit, what you'll find is they've been going to therapy, paying a therapist for 5 years, or they've been sitting in a group for 5 years, but nothing is really better in their lives.
Yeah.
So are they working a recovery? They're sitting in on a meeting, they're paying a therapist. They're not. They're not working a recovery. I always use this example, but you could stand on your head once a day, and if that brings you peace and happiness and confidence and connection, then good for you. That's what you did to get it. So I was talking recently to somebody, and she was saying, my husband's been so empathetic and so honest and so just like consistent with me lately, but I just wish that he were in recovery. And I stopped and I was like, what are you talking about? Well, I just wish he were in recovery. Like, I've never trusted him so much in my life. And I'm like, what are you saying? She's like, well, he doesn't like listening to your podcast. And I'm thinking, like, does he have to listen to our podcast? Well, actually, listening to our podcast means recovery, right?
Yes, that's the first thing. Just kidding. No.
No, but do you guys get my point here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like her husband's probably doing a lot of things that so many girls I hear and work with, that's what they want. They want those things. And
Yes.
that's him living in his values and his truth and showing up for her and being in a partnership. And yeah, he might have trouble with sobriety.
Right.
But you can have the opposite and have sobriety and have zero of those other tools to function as a partnership.
Right.
Yeah, I think listing, if it's okay now, you two, I'd like to identify some of my counterfeits that counterfeits of recovery that I was in, that I exhibited, that I displayed,
Okay.
as you know, through the years. So one of the counterfeits was me, and I mean, we started years ago. I was told to go to 12-step the first time that I actually faced this and put this addiction on the table, and I didn't know it was an addiction. They had to tell me that it was, but I went to 12-step. I showed up, and it just happened to be week 1, and I stayed, and I was like, "This is perfect." And I took my book, and every week, but I would have Ashlynn say, "Are you going to go this week?" Well, yeah, I'm for sure going. I'm for sure going, but I wouldn't ever tell her. But we just kind of had that like
Uncomfortable.
mentally earmarked, like that time, that night, and that time was kind of mentally earmarked for me to go, and I would go. And as soon as I hit week 12, I was out.
I did it.
So
I was
you
out.
worked all 12 steps in 12 weeks and you were done.
And
Yeah,
the best
it was
part was
amazing.
I did look
Sure.
at his book and I was like, wait, there's stuff you're supposed to be doing in here. And he's like, oh no.
Years later, she looked at it. She was like,
So
'Cause
you
I
attended 12 meetings, like check, did
Yes.
that.
and I missed some of those actually because I was out of town for work. But
Oh,
the truth is that I took my book. I didn't do any of the work. I sat there and listened, and I made sure that Ashlynn knew I was going to go,
Yeah.
and I made sure the therapist knew I was going.
Yeah.
Okay, and I would say I just
It's
wouldn't
all
say
to look a
almost
certain
anything.
way.
mm-hmm.
Yes, because I was told this is what I needed to do. And then as soon as I was done with that, I made sure I told my church leader, because they said, you got to go. Then I made sure that I let him know, hey, I finished. Like I did that thing. And he was like, okay, great. That's fantastic. So that's an example of how
Now you're
of
okay.
a counterfeit. I know, right?
You know how many times, you know how like common this is? What you're
Yes,
talking
that's why
about?
it's laughable.
Yeah, I know. But
Mm.
and to us, I mean, we understand the process of recovery and what
Mhm.
recovery really is. And so we understand how ludicrous that is, how nuts
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah.
But we believed it. I mean, that's, I think, important to hear. Maybe you're hearing this and you're like, this is a hopeless episode. I'm doing these things. But the truth is, Coby and I did these things. It's not saying if you're doing these things, you're doing it wrong. It's saying there's more.
Based on my personal
There's-
experience, I got a lot of counterfeits for you.
It's
I got a lot of those.
The counterfeits have everything to do with your heart. Is if you're we've talked about this a lot. It used to be in one of our modules in our workshop. But if your B is not in a place of recovery, then you're not going to find it. If your B is like what you just described, Coby, what you were being was a compliant
Mhm.
manipulator to get other people to see that you were doing the right things.
No.
That's what your
Brandon.
B
I was
was.
really trying to go. I was going. I was committed. I did what I was supposed to do. I did what the expert and the church leader told me to do.
Oh my God.
Why is that bad?
That's true, Brannon. What the crap?
Well, and I want to address another part, another counterfeit part is I've seen many times where a person goes to a therapist who's a little misguided, and that therapist says, okay, this is what you do. You do this, and this, and it's all this garbage. It's all this. And so the person says, okay, and they go and they do all the things that the therapist tells them to do. And what do you know? Their life doesn't really get better.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it's what's interesting about that is they may be willing. They may be like, okay, I'm going to do what you tell me, but they're not something else. They're not confident enough to step up and say, I'm sorry, but this isn't working for me. Like
Yeah.
I'm engaging in this process. We've been here for a while, but I'm willing to self-reflect and be honest with you that really this is not working for me.
Yeah.
And so
Which is hard, but it's been part of our process too of saying, hey, we
really
need a new
hard.
therapist. And I think it's probably obvious for other people looking, if they were going to therapy with us, they'd be like, you guys are wasting your time and money. But for us,
Right.
it took some time to say, we're wasting our time and money. Like we
Right.
need to actually start. We need
Well, and
someone to push us.
I would say hang in there with the therapist for a while, because sometimes things get harder before they get better.
Yes.
Yes.
But after a while, if you're just drinking the Kool-Aid and following something that doesn't feel true to you and doesn't feel
Mhm.
congruent to your heart, then be willing to say this isn't working.
Yeah.
So
Let me give you a couple other examples just
Yes,
real quickly
please.
without lots of explanation. I would call my sponsor-ish. It was just my friend who also had the same struggles. And I would do it in this covert way of, I'm not going to tell Ashlynn I'm going to do it, but I remember every morning on my way to work, I would call my sponsor, and is my friend, but I would call him. And I remember one time he called me early before, like I was walking out the door, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I have to go now. And do you remember that, Ashlynn? Like it was the most weird thing ever. It was the most awkward, uncomfortable thing, because I wanted to talk with him
why were you trying to hide it from Ashlynn?
because I just didn't want her to hear anything.
Oh,
It's like, oh my gosh,
interesting.
no, you can't hear anything. And so I didn't even want to like have the conversation with him, but I had him on the phone and I was saying goodbye, and I was just rushed, and I was just like all wound up and anxious and worried. Right. And so for me, it was like I was dutiful in calling him, but I did not talk about anything that was real.
Well,
It was
and
just like,
when
how you doing?
when they
so
relapsed,
good.
it wasn't like, let's backtrack and figure out where we need to maybe adjust some things. It was just like, I did it again. Dang it.
Yeah. It's
So
like, yep, that sucks. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
All right. We'll
I
talk to you tomorrow.
you just said dutiful. I think that's a big one. Is
Yeah.
dutiful is that's counterfeit.
Mhm.
The opposite of that is discovery. Is so if I'm dutiful, I'm just doing it because I it's
Yeah.
my duty.
Totally.
If you engage, if you go to therapy, you go to therapy group, you listen to our podcast, you do whatever, and it's about trying to find answers and discover
Mhm.
and figure things out, that's recovery.
Well, I'm going to say Dutiful felt real for both sides, for us at least, because it was very much like, if I'm okay with God and our church,
Yeah.
then we're doing
Totally.
good.
Totally.
And that went both ways, because that if I was showing up as like, I'm doing my part, then we were okay.
Yep.
But
Oh,
it didn't
Ashlynn,
have to
I'm so glad you brought that up.
it had nothing to do with, am I okay?
Yeah.
Like, where's my relationship with God? It was more like someone telling me, your relationship with God's good now because you're doing the things.
I
Yeah.
see that with the betrayed so much. Is I'm going to go through the motions of what I should do. I should forgive. I should, I should meet with my church leader and talk about this, or I should go to and I see, and sometimes the betrayed's heart is in a place of, I just want to do what's right so we can get past
Totally.
this. But the real healing and the problem with that is sometimes that when you're caught up in just the duty, and that's what you're seeing, then you can kind of lose yourself sometimes and not be able to say, this is what's working for me, this is what's not working for me, this is what I need, this is what I don't need. So yeah.
Yes.
A couple others real quick. I was independently operating in quote unquote recovery activities, but I was no closer to Ashlynn emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And
So-
we did not have conversations about anything that was related to recovery, addiction, anything. We didn't talk those things. So the counterfeit to that was, the way that it is a counterfeit is, there was no connection.
and
Yeah.
lots of shame.
But there
like
was-
I'm
yeah.
doing all these things that make me feel really bad about myself and where we're at.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. The counterfeit was is I wasn't
that is
vulnerable, I wasn't
counterfeit.
connecting. Yes, it was
it's-
just
it's-
like doing it independent of her.
It's interesting because sometimes I work hard with the betrayed to not jump in and hover over the addict's recovery, right?
Oh yeah, we do it.
And so sometimes the betrayed, when I'm working with them, they're kind of like, well, what? I'm not supposed to know anything. And the truth is a couple, if each one of them is working their recovery, then each partner knows a lot about recovery, because recovery is exciting and new and you're discovering things. And so it's this real awesome opportunity for connection in the relationship. So it's not done out of fear, but it's done out of openness and
Mhm.
vulnerability and honesty
Yeah.
with who you are and what's going on in your lives. So
Well, and that was our first step into connection, was when we figured out we could share and open up without the shame of, "Oh, I learned this thing about myself," or I'm acknowledging this thing. It was, let's connect intellectually about something we're learning about ourselves.
yeah.
So it was kind of this recovery check-in, but not.
Yeah.
It was like, I'm
But it's
learning and you're
connection.
learning.
It's
Yes.
connection based. It's not fear based. So it's interesting how you handled it, Coby, because it was, let me dutifully do these things, but then let me let me show you that I'm doing it, but disconnect from you about doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't any there, and I want to be really, really clear on this. There was no premeditated disconnection. Okay, we were already disconnected because of acting out, and we would ebb and flow between being really disconnected because I was in the fog of shame or the fog of relapse, and then just being regularly disconnected. Does that make
Right.
sense?
We were
Uh-huh.
awesome.
We would just it would be really sucky, and then it would suck a little bit less.
Well-
Sucky and then suck a little bit less. And so we began to think that suck a little bit less
Felt
was really
good.
good. It was like,
Yeah.
oh, freak, we're back
Yeah,
to suck a little
wow,
less.
this is great.
So when we really started understanding what life could be, we were like, oh, we wasted a lot
might
of
have missed a
time.
thing or two.
I know. But when that's taken away and you can see it and feel it, it's like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, this is it. The best indicator of recovery on both sides is that you have healthy attachment, and so that you can create intimacy. So that's the best indicator of recovery from both sides, because both partners can be compassionate and empathetic and open and honest. And so that's amazing what that creates when you create that together. It feels really good.
Yeah. Counterfeits for me, I'm going to say, I mean, a lot of the same stuff. For me, counterfeit was just micromanaging Coby. So it didn't feel, it was
Uh-huh.
different than control before, because once we were like going to group and therapy, it felt right and it felt good, but it was bringing zero safety and connection for
Yep.
me to like make sure he was doing his things right. A lot of the things we don't even do together anymore. It's just like we're just doing the things.
I
and
know,
that's just part of
Ashlynn,
life.
for you, one of the final kind of pieces that has made a big difference is for you to actually want Coby to be him, to step
Yes.
up, and not for you to tell him who he should be or how he
Yes.
should be, but like to let go and let Coby, and that's giving some trust back to him, right? And
Which,
not micromanaging him.
yes, it's like, no, I want to know who you are. And ironically, we were just talking about this on group today. You'll like this, Coby. I want this. This is what the betrayed wants. Just show me who you are, right? And live your truth and be honest to me. And I used all this like the wrong language for him. So he couldn't hear me. So I would just like, be honest. And he's like, what the heck do you mean? Like, this is me being honest. But in reality, when he started like like you said, where I'm like, okay, just be you and live your truth and don't do it for me. He was
Right.
like, here's an example. I like KFC. And I was like, okay. But he was so afraid to tell me that because I don't
Yeah.
like KFC and it makes me sick. So,
Making you sick's got nothing to do with whether you like it or not. Are you kidding me? Like,
but like, that's what I mean is like really little dumb things that I'm just saying, hey, just show up as you. Don't protect me anymore. and we don't have to like the same things, and it's okay.
Yes.
It started in these little funny ways, and he would be afraid. He'd say, I'm really afraid to say what my truth is. And then he'd say it, and I was like, okay, like I already knew that.
But Ashlynn, for you, the counterfeit to recovery is that little bit of a feel-good feeling of like, I can kind of control him, and I kind of like that. Yeah.
And we're on the same page on like everything. This is amazing.
Not real.
Liked that, Ashlynn?
I'm sure I did.
But
I mean, I don't think I went to bed every night like, did my duty. I controlled Coby today.
She didn't have to check the box. She just like, I know I did. I got him.
Yeah.
By the short hairs.
Yeah.
So KFC's amazing. It's bad for you.
So you and Brannon, you can go to lunch, and I will go
Legs
to
and thighs,
the Pancake House.
Pretty please. I think again, another. This is a pretty long one, this episode, but I think it's important that if you're trying to like capture, okay, so what is this really? What are the counterfeits of recovery? I think you first need to evaluate the emotions, the feeling, not the emotions, but the feeling, the energy of recovery, as we described in the very beginning of the episode. And if you can't get to that place where you're feeling more peace, where you're feeling more confidence, where you're more curious, if you're not any more skilled because you're just showing up, then let that be an indicator that you have to be able to commit to the way, like the life of recovery, so that you can actually change from the inside versus just doing things that are visible on the outside without any alteration inwardly.
I think that recovery, there's one way to recovery, and like real recovery, and that's just honesty. Is when I see a person get really honest with themselves, get out of denial, get honest with others, what happens is this weight is lifted off of their shoulders, this weight of shame, this weight of lies and manipulation that they're living in, and this web that they're tangled up in, that they're having a hard time figuring out how to get out of. And all of a sudden, when they face truth and they sit in truth and they're honest, all of that stuff goes away. And then other awesome things start to happen, like deep connection with their spouse and connection with others, and feeling purpose in their life, and all kinds of other awesome stuff. So I hope this episode did two things, you guys. I hope if you're listening to it and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I've been doing the counterfeit, check that out. Maybe you are. There's a lot of people doing that. And that living the counterfeit might be a lot more comfortable for you than going for real recovery. I also hope that you've listened to this and you're not thinking about how your partner needs to change, but it has educated you some about where your partner's really at in their recovery, and why you might be feeling a little bit crazy or out of control, or it seems like you should trust them, but you don't yet. Well, maybe this gave you some answers and helps you understand why you're not quite feeling that connection quite yet.
Yeah. So I think what Brandon's not saying, or don't go tell your partner to listen to this episode because it's all about them.
Exactly.
Well, hopefully that never happens with our episodes, but I think it does. I hope that when you're listening to this, you can have some hope. It's just a shift in priorities. It's a shift in mindset, and to not look at it like recovery is a drag, because living recovery is actually a lot easier, even though it seems harder. It's a very routine life with some flexibility.
Yeah.
I would love to do a whole episode on how our friendships have changed. We have some of those beautiful, and we include you in that, friendships that I wouldn't have had we not really just put ourselves in this circle of the best worst club ever.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
The last thought on this is, for me, just reflecting of the frame of mind that I was in. Recovery was when I was engaged in the counterfeits, not knowingly, ignorantly so, but recovery was inconvenient. It wasn't uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And if it's inconvenient for you to go to a meeting, if it's inconvenient for you to get a sitter, to go to therapy, but you're not uncomfortable, then that can be an indicator that I need to reevaluate my efforts.
I love that.
Because if you're uncomfortable, you're not even thinking about the inconvenience of having to go to group or the inconvenience of having to do individual. But if you are uncomfortable, it's because you're stretching and you're growing, and that discomfort will not always be there. It will allow you to be stretched and to grow. And if you're in that frame of mind that I can be uncomfortable and not run, there's going to be a corresponding energy that will develop you into the person that you actually really have always wanted to be.
Coby, that's just well said. The counterfeits are life sucking from you. Recovery is life giving, and it just,
there's your quote right there.
Well said.
yeah, there it is.
We need to
but
vacuum
it's
for
so
that.
true. So,
guys, we so appreciate you being here. Please share this episode if you've heard something that has uplifted you, that has inspired you, that's caused you to think and pause and be curious. And in the end, just know that we get it. We've been there and we know, and we're just glad that you're here. If you haven't yet, pop over, rate, and review on the podcast app. We'd love to have you there to just share with us how you feeling, and it just might be your review that we read on our next episode.
thanks, guys.
you.
Thanks, guys. Peace out.
We'll see ya.